Not long after the rioters broke into the Capitol, you described what happened with White House counsel Pat Cipollone.
No more than a minute and a half later, I see Pat Cipollone barreling down the hallway towards our office and rushed right in, looked at me, said, "Is Mark in his office?" And I said, "Yes." He just looked at me and started shaking his head and went over, opened Mark's office door, stood there with the door propped open, and said something to Mark is still sitting on his phone. I remember glancing and he's still sitting on his phone. And I remember Pat saying to him something to the effect of, "The rioters have gotten to the Capitol, Mark. We need to go down and see the president now." And Mark looked up at him and said, "He doesn't want to do anything, Pat." And Pat said something to the effect of, and very clearly had said this to Mark, something to the effect of, "Mark, something needs to be done or people are going to die and the blood's going to be on your effing hands. This is getting out of control. I'm going down there." And at that point, Mark stood up from his couch, both of his phones in his hand. He had his glasses on still. He walked out with Pat. He put both of his phones on my desk and said, "Let me know if Jim calls." And they walked out and went down to the dining room.
A few minutes later, Representative Jordan called back.
A couple minutes later, so likely around between 2:15 and 2:25. I know the tweet went out at 2:24. I don't remember if I was there when the tweet went out or if it happened right afterwards, but Jim had called. I answered the phone, said 1 second. He knew it was, I guess he knew it was me. I introduced myself, but I don't remember if he called my cell phone or if he had called one of Mark's. But I answered the phone and said, "1 sec, Mark's down the hall, I'm going to go hand the phone to him." He said, "Okay." So I went down, I asked the valet if Mark was in the dining room. The valet said yes. I opened the door to the dining room, briefly stepped in to get Mark's attention, showed him the phone, flipped the phone his way so he could see it said Jim Jordan. He had stepped to where I was standing there holding the door open, took the phone talking to Jim with the door still propped open. So I took a few steps back. So I probably was 2 feet from Mark. He was standing in the doorway going into the Oval Office dining room. They had a brief conversation, and in the crossfires, I heard briefly what they were talking about, but in the background, I had heard conversations in the Oval dining room at that point talking about the Hang Mike Pence chants.
That clip ended, Ms. Hutchinson, with you recalling that you heard the President, Mr. Meadows, and the White House counsel discussing the Hang Mike Pence chants. And then you described for us what happened next.
It wasn't until Mark hung up the phone, handed it back to me. I went back to my desk. A couple minutes later, him and Pat came back, possibly Eric Hirschman too. I'm pretty sure Eric Hirschman was there. But I'm confident it was Pat that was there. I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, "Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung." And Mark had responded something to the effect of, "You heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong." To which Pat said something, "This is effing crazy. We need to be doing something more," briefly stepped into Mark's office. And when Mark had said something to the effect of, "He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong," knowing what I had heard briefly in the dining room, coupled with Pat discussing the Hang Mike Pence chants in the lobby of our office, and then Mark's response, I understood there to be the rioters in the Capitol that were chanting for the vice president to be hung.
Let me pause here on this point. As rioters chanted Hang Mike Pence, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, said that, quote, "Mike deserves it," and that those rioters were not doing anything wrong. This is a sentiment that he has expressed at other times as well. In an interview with ABC News correspondent Jonathan Karl, President Trump was asked about the supporters chanting "Hang Mike Pence" last year. Instead of condemning them, the former president defended them.
Saying hang Mike
Because
Pence.
it's common sense, John. It's common sense that you're supposed to protect. How can you, if you know a vote is fraudulent, right?
Yeah.
How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress?